chances are most of us won't die from watermelon pesticides. But I think it's not that hard. Fill soap and water. It makes me feel I've done something.
Yeah.
So by identifying what's in our food, we can see, well, if I can avoid poultry or eat it a lot less, I'm going to reduce the amount of arsenic in my diet every day. Because that seems to be a factor, especially in children. And if you look at where do most people in this country get protein from?
From meat.
It's from chicken. Okay, why? It's the cheapest protein there is to buy. Well, at least from animal products. Plant proteins are actually cheaper than that. You can't get any cheaper than beans.
Right.
So there are other things here like the tuna, of all things that has some arsenic in it. Salmon, looks like mushrooms, cereals, and white potatoes. So if you're eating lots of these frequently, you're more likely to have arsenic. And so it's simple advice, eat those almost never, or find an alternative, or eat them a lot less. And that's a very simple way to reduce your arsenic exposure. Okay, let's see what else he says.
I thought I read somewhere that when women are pregnant, that they're to stay away from certain fish.
Right. Yeah, they say eat the fish less than once a week if you're pregnant to avoid the mercury exposure.
Okay.
Well, I'd be more paranoid than that. If they're saying that you need to limit it, that tells you that there's toxins in the fish. Maybe you could find another protein source instead of the fish when you're pregnant. There's plenty of other alternatives that are good sources of protein.
Almost every lake has warnings. You know, I used to live in Ashland, Oregon, and we had a little lake, and it has warnings there. Don't eat fish more than once a month or something from this lake. It was all because of the mercury levels.
Yeah.
You know, so they do post signs around for people.
There is Clear Lake just south of us,
Oh.
and they have that sign there
Mm-hmm.
that you can't eat fish from there more than once a month.
Yeah.
So imagine the people who fish there just catch and release. All right, let's continue.
Tell you a tale of arsenic in chicken. Arsenic is well known as a poison by anyone who reads mysteries or the history of the Borgias. With its long and colorful history, arsenic is not something that people want in their food. So when a biostats student went to the USDA 17 years ago in search of a project for his master's degree, he decided to look into it. And what he found was this startling difference. Arsenic levels in chicken were like 3 times that of other meats. His veterinary colleagues were like, duh, though. I mean, don't you know we feed 4 different types of arsenic-containing antibiotic drugs to poultry? Since, like 1944. So while arsenic-based drugs have been fed to
Sorry.
poultry since the 40s, recognition of this source of exposure for humans only occurred after the student churned through the data. It was published in 2004, expanded upon in 2006. The National Chicken Council was none too pleased, saying lots of foods are contaminated with arsenic. By focusing specifically on chicken, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy makes it clear that their true objective is to force chicken producers to stop using these safe and effective products, by which they mean these arsenic-containing drugs, which they admit to using, but say, don't worry, they use organic arsenic, not the inorganic form made infamous in Arsenic and Old Lace. That is, apparently, until you cook it. When you cook chicken, it appears some of the arsenic drug in the meat turns into the Arsenic and Old Lace variety. And so, the Poison-Free Poultry Act of 2009 was introduced into Congress. You can tell how well that did based on the subsequent introduction of the Poison-Free Poultry Act of 2011. Twist, they said, poison poor poultry, pish posh. And so in 2013, a coalition of 9 groups got together and sued the FDA. And by December 31st, 2015, all arsenic-containing poultry drugs were withdrawn. So as of 2016, arsenic will no longer be fed to chickens. The bad news is that without the arsenic-containing drug Roxarsone, chicken may lose some of its appealing pink color.
Oh my God.
In the end, the poultry industry only got away with exposing the American public to arsenic for 72 years. It should be noted that the European Union had never approved such drugs in the first place, saying, feed our animals arsenic? No thanks. Nein, danke. No grazie. No merci. Europe also long since banned the urgent threat to human health posed by feeding farm animals millions of pounds of human antibiotics, a problem that gets worse every year instead of better, feeding chickens en masse literally tons of drugs like tetracyclines and penicillins to fatten them faster, dating back to 1951, where drug companies whipped out the all caps to promise big profits. A dangerous practice the poultry industry had gotten away with for 66 years and counting.
It seems like Europe seems to be way ahead of us when it comes to health.
Yes.
They do have some progressive ideas. And even though they take less time to get drugs to market, they don't require as many tests on, and human trials are less stringent compared to the FDA. So they end up having more recalls there. While here it takes longer to prove it, which means the likelihood of a recall will happen less frequently. But in terms of their food supply, they guard it more religiously. They actually have to label food over there if it had organic. If it's not organic, it's banned, so it can't really, it can't be sold. But they have sneaky ways of getting it into their food supply where they can actually feed it in small quantities to animals.
What? Feed what?
The GMO foods.
Oh, GMO.
Yeah. They're banned from being sold there directly, but sometimes they get added in small quantities to their food, like at 10% of their cow's food mixture. So they don't get the exposure we do to the GMO. And so they have banned or never approved these arsenic drugs that kill the bacteria that make the animal sick. So if an animal is sick less, it's going to put on more weight, which means the farmer gets more money for that same chicken. For feeding it the same amount, the animal ends up being a little heavier. So they justify the small cost of the antibiotic. Even those animals aren't going to die. It's just if you chose not to put any antibiotic in your animal's food, you'll still make it to market. It'll just be lighter. It won't be as many pounds on that animal because the low-grade illness kind of takes away some of their weight gain. My dad's a farmer, so this is kind of something that's more of interest to me. Right. So you'll find that in Europe, you're more aware of what's in your food. They've been more protective. In this country, you have to have kind of networks like this to learn some of this stuff because these food industries in this country try to make sure we don't know too much about what's in our food. It took this guy till 2004, that university student, to finally expose what has been going on for decades.
Well, they're all about profit.
Yeah. And so they finally couldn't, finally a lawsuit to the FDA forced them to change their policy. They weren't going to force these farmers to abandon using those medicines. So I'm glad we don't have to worry about that, but that's just in chicken, you know. It's still being used in those other animals. But so it's not naturally something that, see, if chicken was essential to a living, you'd say, well, I guess we'll just put up with it. But there are alternatives. And so next time we'll discuss not just what's in our chicken, but also where are other forms of arsenic, because this isn't the only source. Vegetarians can be eating other foods that also have arsenic in them. And so we'll discuss and have a discussion on some of that. Because we don't necessarily have control over everything in our food. You can't always grow wherever you're living. That would be the first choice. Grow the food yourself. But for those of us who can't, you can choose wisely when you're purchasing the food. Yeah. Any comments on that? I thought to finish today's topic, if people have something they want to share in terms of a success or some struggle that they're having in this journey of eating better, being healthier, lifestyle changes that you've adopted. I think sometimes we can encourage each other by sharing what we've learned so that someone else doesn't have to learn the hard way. They can learn from our mistakes or from our solutions that we've come up with. Does anyone feel like sharing something?
Well, I'll just throw this in that I know it's been brought up in these classes how important it is to eat less at the end of the day. In other words, make that the smallest meal, you know?
Yeah, supper being the smaller meal.
Right, right. And I think that's a hard one for a lot of people, you know, and for me too, you know, but I think it really makes a difference on a lot of things.
So how long have you been trying to make this change of making breakfast a bigger meal and supper a smaller meal?
That hasn't been a problem. What's the problem is just making sure that the last meal, if the meal at all, is fruit or something really light.
Okay.
You know?
So rather than foregoing supper altogether, you've chosen to put foods in there that are easier on your stomach to digest.
Right, yeah.
Foods that, for others who may not have discovered this, there's some foods that will sit in your stomach for a lot longer. Carbohydrates and fruit digest very quickly in our stomach, so they don't sit there a long time, which means that if we go to bed, let's say an hour after we've eaten, because we chose to eat late at night, because that's when we got hungry, the stomach may not be empty yet. Especially if we have diabetes, our stomachs are even less efficient at emptying. It may take 4 hours for the stomach to empty in that setting. For many of them, it doesn't empty even in 8 hours. We call that gastroparesis, where the stomach decides to, well, diabetes has this effect on smooth muscles throughout our body, including the stomach, which is made of smooth muscle. And so if the stomach isn't empty of the food, you can think of how the food would spoil, and it makes toxic byproducts that are not for our best health. So choosing foods that every week I'm encountering people doing studies on them where they have issues of acid reflux. You're more likely to have issues with gastritis and acid reflux if you're eating your biggest meal at night, because now in many cases that food won't sit, it will end up sitting in your stomach all night, especially if you ate foods that are high in fat and high in animal protein. Those kind of foods take a lot longer to digest, and your stomach isn't lazy. It does its job thoroughly, which means if it just dumped the food incompletely processed, what happens to this meal? It turns into diarrhea, basically. So the rest of your intestines aren't well served if the stomach, for some reason, just is cut out of you and replaced with the intestine. Because that happens to some people. They have a reason to have surgery to cut out the stomach, You think, well, if that's such a troublemaker, just get rid of it. But then the rest of your small intestine acts more like a stomach. It will just get bigger. It will allow the food to just sit there for a while, and it tries to compensate. So what he's bringing up is a good point. It's not rocket science, but if you haven't made that transition to making breakfast a big part of your day, and supper choosing foods that are digest easily, carbohydrates and fruit, you aren't really giving yourself the best way to be healthy. What benefits will that do? One, you'll lose weight without trying, without going hungry. You will lose weight, and that means if you have diabetes, you're more likely to be successful at getting rid of the diabetes, because it's the fat in our body that creates insulin resistance, not just the fat in our diet. Those two are enemies.
I got a question on that, because I've read and I know that if you eat the whole fruit, you get the fiber and stuff, and so it assimilates the sugar slowly. And obviously in fruits, different fruits, there's higher sugar content in it. Is there a worry of, since you're eating the whole fruit, on the higher sugar content in fruit, as far as different fruits and lower, because different fruits will have lower content?
It's true. Your tongue can tell you which foods have more free sugar. They'll taste sweeter. Celery doesn't have much free sugar. Your tongue will tell you that.
Just fruit, I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So blueberries taste less sweet than, let's say, strawberries.
Or peach.
But the good thing is the fiber slows down the whole process. So by eating our food just with our teeth, we're going to slow down the digestion process enough so that the sugars end up going slowly into our bloodstream. So we haven't seen issues with that until people get rid of all the fiber, like apple juice. You drink apple juice instead of eating the apple whole, then you run into that fruit sugar issue. We've been told over and over, stay away from high fructose corn syrup products, like sodas. Well, what is the highest fruit sugar? What makes fruit sweet? It's fructose, and that's the main component of fruit sugar. So that would make, in theory, fruit worse than soda pop, right? Because it's 100% high fructose corn syrup equivalent. High fructose means it's above 50% is fructose. It might be as high as 70 or 80%. But if it's 100% fructose, that makes it fruit. So why don't we avoid fruit if that high fructose corn syrup is so bad? It's the fiber. That's the key. So if we're juicing, that's why I keep saying juice in small quantities. It's okay to supplement, especially if you're sick, but don't then make your whole meal in a large cup and not expect to feel ill. 2 hours later, after you drink that much juice without the fiber, you're going to feel ill because your blood sugars are dropping. And then you get shaky and you can't concentrate because of the low blood sugars. So it doesn't matter if it's healthy sugar, without the fiber it becomes unhealthy.
The fructose in fruit is very different than high fructose corn syrup, and Dr. Greger has some videos on that on his nutrition facts, right? You agree with that? That it's different, that all those studies and everything that warned about high fructose corn syrup, that it was all just processed food, high, corn syrup stuff. It wasn't fructose in fruit, right?
Well, the more concentrated the fructose is in our food, the sweeter the product is. So the manufacturers kind of keep pushing high fructose corn syrup to be more and more, instead of 50%, maybe 70 or 80%. If it gets to be 100%, you can't tell fructose that came from corn from fructose that came from fruit. Chemically, it's the exact same chemical. But the corn has fiber in it, and the fruit has fiber in it. So the problem is we separated the fruit sugar from all that fiber and other antioxidants and nutrients that a liver needs to process that sugar.
So, but if you blend, like you have a Vitamix and you blend blueberries with some almonds and a banana and other things, and you have all the fiber in there. It's different than just juicing it.
It is. There are some people who won't be satisfied if you eat a smoothie. Let's say your teeth are bad, or you're eating foods that you're not used to eating this much fruit, but you find it acceptable to have a smoothie. Now, your kids now, you can sneak some spinach into their food by hiding it in a smoothie. It just turns it green, but you can't taste the spinach. So there are some benefits to making a smoothie. But Dr. Greger recommends using a spoon to finish the smoothie. Why is that? Because you're treating it like a meal. You're giving it time to fill up your stomach, and then you're not going to overindulge and eat more calories than you really would. Because by giving it time, your stomach will actually make you feel full. If you just eat the apples, it takes longer. Nobody can just guzzle down an apple in 5 minutes, unless you eat it poorly chewed. But you can do that with a smoothie quite easily. And when the stomach doesn't have time to adjust to the food inside, you're going to feel hungry and you're going to want to eat more than you really should for the meal. You're going to eat more calories than you probably need. So that's the advantage of using a spoon. It's basically consume it a little slower. Yeah, the other advantage is we're mixing it with saliva, and that's part of the natural process of digestion. If we just chug down a smoothie, we bypass the benefits of the saliva that's normally mixed with our food. Yeah. All right. Any other comments on struggles or victories in this journey of better health? All right.
The box.
Yeah?
The box.
Oh yes, thank you. In the back of the room we have a box that's, we can take your requests. If you have a concern you'd want to be brought to, say you have a prayer request, you can write that on a slip of paper and put it in the box. If you want to share a recipe, you could put it in the box and we can get copies of it made. So I'd like to encourage you, if you find you have found some simple recipe that you think is neat because it's replaced something that you wanted to replace. Say you've given up pork chops and you decided you want to replace something on your plate, and you've come up with an alternative that you find is very satisfying. If you want to share that with us, we bring those recipes, we can pass those out and let other people enjoy those good, nutritious alternatives. All right, I think we're out of time. Let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, thank you for the understanding of what makes good health. Thank you for reminding us that counting our blessings this week will bring us joy, because this is how you've made us. When we discount what we've received from you, we end up in a life of misery. May this week be full of joy as we continue this journey toward better health. We pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen.